Alrighty, super. We will get started here. Just a couple little housekeeping things. I did send out a new calendar, and I apologize for the delay on that, but we really wanted to put it into a format that was very sequential and easy to read. And so I'm happy to, if you have any questions about that, you might either let me know, or we have our program directors meeting on July 30th and 31st here in Topeka, and so we can address any of those questions. But we really tried to go out into the year and list a lot of that. So we'll keep updating that, but hopefully that was helpful. The purpose of today's webinar is due to the fact that we have clarified with Octave on the time and effort reporting, and it seems that it's a little bit different what the career tech ed side of Octave requires versus the adult ed as far as submitting to our office. And so I've clarified with our reps there. And so I want to thank Laura Leahy, who is for another week and 2 days our Senior Associate Director for Career Tech Ed. She is moving on to another position, and if you know of anyone interested in that position, it's listed on our website. But Laura has been gracious enough to adapt our webinar and some slides to fit adult education today. So the biggest thing is, you know, I'm sure that you all are already tracking this, but tracking that and not submitting it is not in compliance with what Octave requires. And so she is going to go through this. We will actually put this up with a link to a YouTube site on our webpage, and then we will also obviously be happy to answer any questions. So we'll go through it, and then we'll talk about what we need retroactively or by July, by this semester time period, in order to be ready for our monitoring visit. So with that, Laura, thank you again, and I will let you jump in here. And if you would go ahead and everyone mute, and then as we go along, if you have questions, you can type them in the chat box, or we are sure happy to answer all of those at the end.
All right. Thank you, Connie. Thank you, everybody. We are, like Connie said, we are recording this, and we welcome any questions as we go. It's a great learning tool for people as they work through this. Time and effort is extremely important. It is one of the things that the feds do like to look at and pick on, as we'll be able to see. Because really, you think, well, we keep track of time and we're paying our employees and we know what's going on. Why is it important to do a separate form for the federal government? Well, because you are being paid by the federal government. And Northeastern University probably wish they had paid closer attention to that, because they had to pay back to the federal government $2.7 million for a settlement of mishandling federal research funds, which included paying salaries without required documentation. Jackson State University had to pay a $1.7 million settlement over time and effort reporting only. And you might think, well, we don't have a large amount of money. Well, any kind of money that the feds take as a settlement back from you or from the state of Kansas is going to be a problem. Doesn't matter how big it is. So what is time and effort reporting? It is a documentation of time spent on any activity. So you will be keeping track of the activities that you are doing, and it's more than HR timekeeping. So you probably are doing the HR timekeeping, like we said, for your pay and for employees' wages and things like that. But this is a separate type of timekeeping, and you're keeping track of your activities. So what is the point? Who does this? Any employee funded by a federal grant must maintain documentation showing that their time is allocable to a federal program. And if you want to research that further, you can go to the CFR, which is 200.403A. And it's documentation that must be based on records that accurately reflect the work performed. So they're interested to see what you're actually doing while you're being paid with federal funds and how it relates to your federal grant. All time and effort documentation must be supported by a system of internal controls which provide reasonable assurances charges are accurate, allowable, and properly allocated. So a paper trail and policies and procedures is always very important that encompasses how you are going to do your time and effort. It must be incorporated into your official records, so it has to tie in with what you're already doing for HR and for your employees. It must reasonably reflect the total activity for each employee for which the employee is compensated. So they can't have time that isn't tracked. Thank you. It must encompass all activities, federal and non-federal. So if you have an employee that's only half paid by the federal grant, you can't track just half of their time. You have to show what they're doing when they're not on federal time also. And they must comply with established accounting policies and practices. So hopefully you already have established policies and procedures and practices, and so it must fall within those in addition to fall into the federal. And it must support the distribution among specific activities or cost objectives. So again, they want to see specifics. They want to see what you're doing with their money. So if you haven't been tracking these federally, your federal time, you need to have written policies and procedures in place. And this is essential. This follows all of the EDGAR. You must have these in place to implement your time reporting system. You need to have written instructions that are developed and that cover the completion of time and attendance reporting, the approval cycle that is required, which you'll see in a little bit, the processing of personnel charges to the federal awards. How do you pay those employees that are being paid by federal funds, and what's the process? And then what is your internal review process that will be established to ensure effective internal controls? So they want to know that you have internal controls over the funds that are being paid out in personnel. Generally, they just want information that is sufficient in detail to permit an understanding of how the system will operate from the point that the time is expended to the point that the time is recorded and accounted for and charged to the federal grant. Okay, we have a question here. It says, does KBAR have a set of procedures in writing we could use in our policy documents, something we could use or adopt?
So to answer that was a question that was posted. We actually, when we worked with our Perkins programs to make sure this was all in place before the last monitoring visit, we were advised by Octave and the Department of Ed that that's not something that we can write. That's something that the institution should have. So I think going back to the slide that's on the screen right now, this sounds like a big thing, but actually we're going to give you some guidelines, and you may have already looked at the PowerPoint, but basically, you know, what's the interval, what's the process, who approves it, who charges the personnel charges to the awards, and then, you know, is it being reviewed internally? So I think actually if you think back and you refer to this slide, and basically it's sort of a fill in the blank that doesn't have to be anything very extensive, but unfortunately that's something that we were advised against not sharing. And so I will tell you before we get on, well, I'll go ahead and let Laura go, and then we kind of talk about other ways to record that.
Okay. All right, and so we'll move on to the next slide. So what you need to do is, like we were just talking about, update your policies and procedures with the time and effort requirements. And like Connie said, that previous slide just kind of walks you through what's needed. It doesn't have to be really complicated. It's just they need to see that you have a step-by-step process and that you're not forgetting it. And then it is a federal requirement that staff is trained annually on your policies and procedures, and that would include your time and effort. So at least once a year you have a in-service training or a staff training, and you just talk to them about how the policy works.
And I think one of the things, when Octave was here before, their big thing about the policies and procedures, especially with this was soon after the new EDGAR regs were released. So their big thing is, so you have a process in place in an institution or a school district or a program, and then that person leaves and nothing is in writing. Then what happens? So that was their big question, and where they really wanted that in place.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Just having it written out is
right.
what needs to be done. Okay. So there are two types of certification that you would have you or your staff falling into with the reporting. One is the semi-annual, and that means that 100% of your time is paid by the AFLA Leadership Grant. So this is a pretty simple document, and we'll show it to you on the next slide. It's signed by the employee or the supervisor or any official having firsthand knowledge of the work performed by the employee. And these do have to be turned into KBOR for tracking. They are due to the KBOR office on it's 2 times a year, semi-annual. So there's the first half would be due February 1st, and it's July 1st through December 31st. And then again with your annual report in August, and it is from January 1 to June 30th.
And so I'm going to flip back to bullet 2 because this is something that our office has had to do, is sign off on time and effort. And so the question, you may have an adjunct or something like that that is paid 100% from your adult ed funds, but maybe they are, and we'll talk about requirements, but it has to be signed after the time period. So let's say they work through May, and then come June 30th, you need to have a time and effort signed, and they're gone, and you can't get them. Bullet 2 indicates that a supervisory official can sign off on that document for them.
Yeah, after the work. Good point.
After the
Eric's
work is
here.
completed.
Right, after the work. You can't sign it before the end of the time period. All right. And this is a sample of the form. It's really, I'm sure Connie will send this out. It's just a semi-annual certification, and this comes from the federal government. And you change the name, of course, and they've worked 100%, so don't change the percentage. And then you put their name, his or her time, but you do put the name in there somewhere, and the dates that we just gave you, that the time that it's covered and by the funds. So the supervisor may sign below the employee name if the employee is not available. It must be after June 30th. It must be on or after employee signature above on the date.
So this is the document that will be submitted with your final report in August for anyone who has worked 100% of their time being paid from AFLA Adult Ed funds. And you'll notice it's dated correctly, January 2018 to June 30th, 2018. It has to be dated after June 30th, 2018. So you can create your own little form if you want to, and I put that in red because when I put it in red, it's because we've heard this many times from our finance department also.
Yeah.
So any questions on that? I know people have muted themselves, but we're happy to stop here and answer questions if you have some.
Okay. All right, the next one is called you may hear it called a PAR, but it's a personnel activity report. So this is for somebody who has multiple funding streams. So they're getting paid by more than just the federal adult ed grant. And it must account for the total activity in which an employee is compensated. So you can't just account for the part that's paid by this grant, you must account for all of their activity. And you would prepare and submit the signed documents to KBOR monthly, and they're due by the 15th of each month, and they are submitted to Eric Tincher.
Mm-hmm. And so we'll stop there a second. This is where I went back to Octay and clarified whether you all could submit these all at once, like with your final report. The answer to that was no. They need to be submitted monthly. And so if we could at least start that process starting June 1st, so that we can get those records. We'll have those records starting June 1st and going forward for our monitoring visit.
And this one does require the employee signature, not just the supervisor's.
Right. So Laura, if you go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm. And I think I added. This time could be accounted for as a percentage. You don't have to do it by time, like 4 hours of this and 3 hours of that. It could be 25% of their time was spent on this funding stream, 25 on this one, etc. And then again, you need to be, as you write it in, you need to be specific on what you're working on and document your activity. Think about how that activity is in support of the grant.
I've got a question.
Okay, Eric.
So for 20, let's say it is 25% then, the 75% then have to be the other way of funding?
Right.
It always has to be 100%.
Yes, they always have to equal 100%. Good point. Yeah.
So the next slide shows a fairly blurry PAR. And so there's some different options, and we've taken some of these out of federal examples. This is an example where the employee would fill it out day by day, and this is just a sample of what you could use. The other thing that you can use, depending on your pay system, and this is what we do now at the Board of Regents. So we used to sign the form that you saw earlier, the 100%. We used to sign that document. Now in the state of Kansas pay system, when I record my time, I'm choosing a task profile. So I'm able to charge my time to various funding streams, and those are viewable in our system. So if your business office has, if you happen to be able to charge time like that, you're welcome to do a printout like that, showing that for this personal activity report. Mm-hmm. You could also just, if you're doing it by percentage, you could create a form that just shows, the employee name, the department, and the time period, and then X% for, might be federal, or might be adult ed funds, and then X% whatever else they're equaling up to 100%. Sign that and submit it. And if that doesn't change, that might be the same thing they submit every month.
Right. And as long as, if you do want to change this, you have to have it approved prior by KBOR staff. But because we do with Perkins, we have other institutions that have adapted this form so they can do it electronically, and they're not doing two forms. So you may adapt your HR payroll forms to fit the same, so you're doing dual purpose. But again, you just have to have that approved through KBOR staff. Are there any questions on this one? This is the one where you would be accounting for your activity, and you would be accounting for what the activity is under each funding stream. And it doesn't have to be a long explanation. It's just a brief, brief explanation of what you were doing of the activity. But make sure it would, if somebody else is looking at it, it ties to the federal funds.
So I'm going to circle back, because everything we've talked about here is something that you should be keeping locally anyway. It's just that KBOR has never asked for it to be submitted.
Okay, we have a couple of questions that have been texted in. If we have an instructor who is being paid from AFLA and IELCE state and local funds, does the T&E time and effort report only include activities for AFLA and IELCE? No, it has to be all funds have to be accounted for.
Has to show 100% of their time.
Right. So you would have to tell, a little bit of what they're doing with the others so that the percentages equal 100. And then we have another one, same question as before, is there an example or is this a locally created document? This is a federal example that we're showing for the PAR.
We might have a local one that we could take names from and share. We'll have to look back and
or if not, we have some from
Brustein that we can share.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we'll see what we can locate to share out some examples.
So, Connie and Laura, this is Kelly and Selena. If we have a staff member that's 100% federal paid, we can do the semi-annual certification. If I have somebody that's split between federal, state, local, that's when we do the PAR.
Correct.
And if I have somebody that's state and local with no federal, I don't even have to do anything for it.
That is actually, for right now, let me put that question on hold, Kelly. I actually reached out to, Laura and I had that conversation this morning. I reached out to Octave today and have not gotten a call back. But I have asked that question. I'm thinking the answer might be no, but I'm not sure how picky they are about showing the match. I don't really know. I'm hoping the answer to you is no, but
Okay, me
as
too.
soon as soon as I find that, and I will definitely let you know.
Okay,
And on the federal, if it's 2 federal funding streams, then you would have to show that. It's the funding stream.
Right.
If you have another federal funding stream besides AFLA.
So what if we have someone who's not paid out of our grant funds at all?
Then we don't need to know anything about it.
Okay, good deal.
Winner, winner.
May I interrupt?
Yes?
All right, this is Jason in Emporia. I kind of jumped in late because we're on the wrong call. All of my employees work 100% of their time on AFLA related. There's no other funding stream outside of federal, state, and local. Is this going to have me split that out to federal, state, local on someone who's 100% of their time is AFLA?
Yeah, what I'm hoping, let me check on that clarification also,
Okay.
Jason, and I was hoping to have that
Okay.
today so we can answer everything. What I'm hoping is that when I pose the question to Octave, if they're working 100% of the time for AFLA funded adult education, can they do the semi-annual certification?
Okay.
I just don't have that answer, so I will be sending that.
No worries.
I will be sending that answer out as well as the question about state and local.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? And again, you can reach out to any of us while you're working on these.
This is Janice, and I do have a question. So if we have an individual who is funded by a foundation in part, do we have to identify the fund source, or just that it is a private foundation grant that pays a percentage?
Private foundation.
Yeah, Are they being paid part with any of your adult ed funds, Janice?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So do we just say foundation, or do we have to tell you which foundation?
Oh, no, just foundation.
Okay.
They just want, their concern is just the tracking of the federal funds on 100% of that person's time. And 100% of the time could be, 2 hours a day, but that's their concern.
Got it. Thank you.
And then again, those are emailed on a monthly basis to Eric following the 15th of the following month, and then February 1st, and then with your final report. So as I said, if everyone could, number one, take that form or something similar, look at your 100% people, and then look at the time period of January 1 through June 30th, have those people sign that following June 30th and submit that with your final report for the 100%ers. And then for the PAR, begin that on June 1st. So we would have the first submission of those July 15th, the second submission August 15th. So we would have a couple good months of reporting and data when the feds come in August. And then we'll continue that process.
Connie, would you repeat that, please?
So if you would go ahead and right now you would identify those people who are being paid 100% with adult education funds, and that would be the time and effort certification that we showed you first. So you want to flip back to that part?
Oh, yeah.
So it'd be the semi-annual time and effort that we showed. It would be that document. So it says semi-annual certification. So look at those people who are 100% from your grant January 1 to June 30th of this year. And then after June 30th, you would have them sign off on this document for this last 6-month period from January to June. Those would be submitted with your final report. So those are the people that are 100%. Those people who are not being paid 100% through and is paid with multiple funding streams, if you'll begin that documentation on June 1, and the PAR, which Laura has a picture of that up there, that is due the 15th of the month following. So if you start on June 1 to report for that month, that would be due electronically to Eric on July 15th. And then the month of July would be due to Eric on August 15th, and so on. And that's the part I had to confirm with Octave, that we had to collect these on a monthly basis, and they affirmed. I was hoping the answer to that was no, but they affirmed that we must be collecting it on a monthly basis. So what we're trying to do is in this case, identify here is a reporting gap that we have, and we're taking the steps to fix it and show that we have remedied that when they come in August. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Connie, I have another question. It's Kelly. How do we define what duties go to federal, what duties go to state, what go to local?
I mean, I think it's going to be if you have an instructor, Kelly, they're an instructor, you're just paying them with various funding streams. Is that the case?
Right. And I've got I've got 6 instructors, and one might be all federal, one might be all state, one might be half of each, one might be local federal. It's mixed matching to get the funds to fit the salaries. Right. But all their duties, there's nothing different because they're federal or state or local. How do I do that?
Yeah, the activity could be the same.
I think the activity could be the same. It's just the split of the money. So if that's the case, Kelly, where you have someone, your 100%ers are going to be submitted semi-annually.
Right.
Then someone who's broken out with multiple streams, you might just take a form and basically, use the name and that type of thing, and then put the percentages. Mm-hmm. So, maybe 50% is AFLA, maybe 25% is your local funds, whatever the case may be, and then just have that person sign that after the end of each month. Now, if you have them dated, we don't know that. I just know, for example, if this PAR report, we know this historically with Perkins, or even us reporting here at the Board of Regents. If it's for the time period through June 30th, or let's say this month through May 31st, and that employee dates that May 15th, because it's the last day of school, that would be rejected and out of compliance, because it's not after the time that person worked.
Okay. I might touch base with you later just to make sure I do it right, but I'm looking more than at just certifying the streams, not the duties.
Right.
Okay.
I think with a lot of you, the duties are basically they're instructing, or it's your data, maybe it's your data person, or
right.
But again, if it's 100%, it doesn't make any difference. They're just reported 100% is when they go to split that out.
Okay.
Connie, it's all full and part-time folks that we need to do this on? I know it's 100% of their time, but even our part-time people need to do this.
Right, if they're paid with any adult ed funds.
Right. And the adult ed funds that break out between the variety of grant things like things like this new grant. That's federal funds, or it varies, doesn't it?
Actually, that is confusing. Yes. Those are federal, but historically, so we've always done a lot of extra grants on the Perkins side because we have a lot of funds designated that from the government, and those always require time and effort to be supported if you're paying salaries and that type of thing. And Octave didn't even go down that road, but I know that is required.
Okay.
It's just a tracking of their federal money. Yeah, your part-time could still be 100% though.
Right. Even if they're like a 15-hour week, if all of their time is paid for by AFLA, then they're 100%.
Correct, right. I understand that.
Okay, yeah, that was a good clarification. I know this is a super busy time for everybody, and I'm sorry to launch this on you here in the middle of the year. However, it was sort of launched on us, and what I want to do is make sure that we get things in order and have a proper process and procedures to be compliant, obviously, but also for our visit.
Well, Connie, we have done this before in adult ed.
Okay.
We had to submit time and effort logs previously. I don't know who's around that would remember. Maybe Kelly.
It was only for people that were working in other entities outside
Like-
of the grant.
Right.
Yeah, and our
Right.
GED examining, for those of us that were a dual center, had to do that.
And you know, I think some of this also came about with when the Edgar regs were rolled out in 14, because that form, the semi-annual certification, that's actually the form that is in that black Edgar reg book you have.
Yeah.
So I believe, thinking back to then, the regulations got a little tighter then. So I know that's when, for Perkins, that's when we really had to make sure everybody had policies and procedures and were accurately reporting and everything. Any other questions? You're sure welcome to, communicate with us offline about, if you want us to review something or, and again, with the policies and procedures, like Laura said, I would walk through that slide and just basically write down how you're doing it at your institution. Doesn't have to be real fancy.
No.
I guess one thing that I just want to jump in, this is Eric, and jump in and say is that obviously we're going to have to be working together to make sure we've got the right list of people. So if you've not gone into Pablo recently, make sure that your staff list is correct. That would be very important for us to do as soon as possible, because I'm going to have to come up with some sort of a tracking spreadsheet way to make sure that this is all getting done correctly on our end here at KBOR. So thank you in advance.
That's a good point, Eric, because one of the requirements of our visit will be a demonstration of Pablo, where we do a demo with them, going through all the different aspects of it and the reporting and the faculty and so on. And so what could happen, great point, Eric, is that here's the list of faculty from Cali, for example. Oh, can we see their time and efforts? And we've heard historically that, like Laura said, the time and effort is such an easy thing to nail people on, to really get states on. So I appreciate that reminder, Eric.
Eric,
Hey,
your
Connie and Eric.
raised another question in my mind, though. If we have substitutes listed in Pablo, there may be periods where they have nothing to report. Do we need to report a 0 hour for those times?
So they only with different parts of the year. I guess just let Eric know that not to look for him.
They weren't paid with federal funds then.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
I mean, I guess don't worry about the people who are in there that aren't working, because then it becomes a total nightmare.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But yeah, I think just report on those people, and I think we're good on the people who are actually working during that month or time period.
Got it, thanks.
And another thing about updating Pablo for updating all your staff. I know we've talked about this a couple times, but Pablo asks you for your staff member's social security number. You don't have to enter that. You can use a center assigned ID number, or you can make up a social security number for them, but we do need the actual staff profile to be accurate and up to date.
Hey, Chris or Eric?
Yep.
Yeah, quick question. Of course, we keep our staff profiles and all that up to date, but is there going to be a red flag or somewhere that we need to signify? I have 4 instructors that are not paid out of any AFLA dollars at all, but they're obviously staff members or instructors. They're in Pablo, but they're not paid for out of any. They don't have anything to do with AFLA in terms of salary? Is that going to cause an issue?
We'll flag, we can flag those people.
I'm sorry?
There's already a place where you can do that. It's table 7.
Okay.
You go to Pablo staff, or it's form 7. It will have a list of all your current staff members, and then it asks for sources of funds. If you want to update that sheet,
okay,
and just let us know, like, there's a percent paid from other funds. You could put 100% from other funds, and there's a field in there where you can put corrections.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Alrighty, we will we'll send out a link to a YouTube site. I'll send it to all the adult ed directors. So remember, it's program leaders. It is your responsibility to get it to those people that you need to within your organization. But we'll send that out. That takes you to a YouTube site so that you have this electronically also. And if you have questions, if you will direct those to Eric, and then we will be happy to help you and go from there.
Will you send copies of the documents you would like us to use that you were showing?
Yes, I certainly can.
Okay.
All right.
All righty.
Thank you.
Have a great day.